Okay, hey everybody. I have a mock trial thing going on in the afternoon, so I'm not going to be able to record live with you guys today. So I'm just going to do like this, and we'll go over the things that you've missed. All right. So when we left you guys, we left you here. I had shown you this screen, but we didn't cover anything. All right. So after the murders, after the Phoenix Park murders of 1882, William Gladstone over here, William Gladstone turns on the Irish, basically, right? He had been supporting the Irish, which is why he had appointed his assistant and close personal friend to be the leader. But after Cavendish is murdered in the park, Gladstone basically just says, screw you guys, right? This is what we call the long wait. And so for the 1880s, 80s, 90s, and early 1900s, all the way until about the year 1910-ish or so, the Irish basically have very little progress in any of their kind of independence movements. Um, uh, this is not a time of nothing happening, though. Okay, this is the time of the rise of two very important organizations, two of the most important organizations for the founding of Ireland. All right, the first is called the Gaelic Athletic Association up here. And the Gaelic Athletic Association is exactly what it sounds. It's basically the governing body of all Irish sports. They're playing field hockey. Field hockey at this time period is the most popular sport, but it also includes things like cricket, soccer, rugby, um, anything that's being played, basically. Now, this may seem kind of strange, you're right, like kind of frivolous, like it's only sports, it's not that big of a deal. But the Gaelic Athletic Association is very important for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that it gives people a sense of nationalism, it gives people a sense of regional pride, it gives people something to latch onto, right? This is also going to give us some early like kind of branding and stuff where you can like brand yourself as a member of a sports club or a supporter of a team. This also proves to be the number one recruiting organization for armed resistance later on. And as it turns out, a lot of the skills that athletes need to succeed are also the kinds of skills that soldiers will need to succeed as well. Um, this is a huge unifying force for especially men of the island. The church is probably still the number one. The Catholic Church is probably still the number one unifying force, but the Gaelic Athletic Association is a close number two. Is a close number two, and it's been 30 years since the movement got kind of shelved, and in that time the young generation is growing up, and the young generation is less religious than before, is less connected to tradition. The young generation does not remember the famine. They don't remember that struggle that was going on in the beginning, and so the young generation is unified by things like sports. um, Okay, the next big organization is called the Gaelic League. And the Gaelic League over here, the Gaelic League was dedicated to bringing back the language Gaelic. So for hundreds of years now, Ireland um, had been forced to speak English, and Gaelic was basically a dead language or very close to a dead language at this point. And um, and so the Gaelic League is trying to bring the language back. So they start with schools, and a lot of their work is in schools in the beginning, where they're working with teachers, and they're working with schools trying to get Gaelic books and Gaelic lessons and stuff. Um, they start working with like merchants and shop owners and stuff who start putting up Gaelic signs in their stores. Eventually the Gaelic League will start putting up street signs in Gaelic and stuff, and they will eventually push for Gaelic to be taught in every school across the island. Um, this is very difficult. It takes a long time. It's slow progress, but the use of the language Gaelic is looked on as an act of nationalism, as an act of independence, as an act of, ethnic pride, as connection to your history. We have a good poster here, right, where if you want to be on the side, right? What side do you want to be on? Do you want to be on Erie, which is the Gaelic word for Ireland, right? With a noble warrior woman of the past, right? Or do you want to be the peasant wrapped in the British flag, where Ireland basically is just West Britain, right? Where you're just tied there hanging out. Um, the Gaelic League has a lot more women in it. Obviously, the Gaelic Athletic Association is mostly not women. It's almost exclusively men. But the Gaelic League does have quite a few women because a lot of it is dealing with schools, right? And teaching and education is kind of the realm of women. And so there you are. All right, next. We're going to get to the election of 1910. So next big number. The election of 1910 is important because it produces what we call a hung parliament. A hung parliament, and to be clear here, this is a UK election, which covers everything on this map, right? At this point in time, Ireland is part of the UK, right? So it covers everything on this map. A hung parliament is a parliament where no single party has the majority. Okay. And when this happens, it doesn't happen a lot, but when it does happen, parties need to form alliances. They need to form what we call a coalition. We don't really do this in the United States, but in parliamentary systems, it's pretty common, right? And in some parliamentary systems, it's very, very common. In the British one, it's not super common, but it does happen. So in this case, if you look at these electoral maps here, yellow is the Liberal Party, blue is the Conservative Party, green is the IPP, which is the Irish Parliamentary Party. And you can see from this point here that Ireland is actually pretty unified, but we are starting to see the definite divisions between North Ireland and Republic of Ireland. At this point in time, Ireland is one unit, and that entire unit is part of the UK, right? But we can see the divisions here. Anyway, so John Redmond, who is the leader of the IPP, he forms a coalition with Asquith here. Asquith is then elevated up to the position of prime minister, and in exchange for his support, Redmond and the IPP get the liberal support of Home Rule for Ireland. If Home Rule passes, then Ireland will be able to control itself in much the same way that like Canada does or Australia does or South Africa does at this point. At this point in time, Canada, Australia, South Africa, they all have a home rule, which is something like 80% independence or something like that, right? It's mostly independent. The Home Rule Bill of 1912 doesn't actually get run through until 1914, but it does not pass. It does not pass because of the Home Rule crisis. So let's talk about some of this resistance to the Home Rule Bill. All right, so the Home Rule Bill is going to be the loudest opponent to the Home Rule Bill is going to be this guy over here, Sir Edward Carson. This is a modern day, graffiti picture of him. But Edward Carson, later on, he becomes a knight. But Edward Carson is the leader of what is going to be called the Irish Unionist Party, or the Orange Order. Okay. From this point forward, whenever we see anything that's called Unionist or anything that's called Orange, right? So like the Orange League, the Orange Men, the Orange Volunteers, or the Union Party or the Unionist League or the Unionist Volunteers, that means North Ireland. Unionist, and Orange means North Ireland. Anything that's coming from South Ireland, from the Republic of Ireland, is going to be known as like Republic something, or National something, right? Republic Party, Republican Party, or Nationalist Party, or just the Volunteers, right? The Nationalist Volunteers, the Republican Volunteers. Anyway, so Edward Carson, here's Carson right here. He's signing something called the Ulster Covenant. And the Ulster Covenant is a declaration of the relationship between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And they make a commitment that North Ireland will never leave and that they will, at this point, they're trying to keep all of Ireland as part of the UK. But if need be, Ulster will leave. Ulster will stay with the UK. And this is going to be the precursor for what will become North Ireland. And this division is pretty strong division. It's a here's a poster to the extent, right? The Ulster's prayer, don't let go, right? The prosperity province versus the poverty versus Maynooth versus Land League provinces, right? And this one is tied up and it's holding on to England, the same color, right? This is what they're going for. And we're starting to look like we can see the division coming. All right. So Carson and his groups are the biggest opponent. Another notable opponent is going to be women's suffrage organizations. The women's suffrage organizations, specifically of England and of Great Britain. And here's a good example here. This cartoon is showing Redmond, right? Remember Redmond from here, John Redmond. Okay. So this is showing Redmond as this, angel with no votes for women, right? And he's walking on the body of a woman, of an Irish woman. The criticism from the suffragette movements was that the Irish, the Catholic Church was profoundly unfeminist, and that if the Catholics are allowed to rule their own country, that they will take away women's rights and they will oppress women's rights because of their conservative Catholic nature, that they will do that. I think knowing what we know about Ireland coming up here, we know that there's at least some truth in this accusation. Ireland is going to be not great for women's rights. Ireland is going to have a lot of problems with women's rights moving forward, and Ireland is going to consistently be one of the worst countries in Western Europe for women's rights for quite a long time. But I don't want you to walk away thinking that this argument is 100% true, because there's also a lot of like prejudice involved in this argument, right? There's also just kind of a general anti-Irish prejudice and an anti-Catholic bias. So there is at least a grain of truth in this argument, but I think you'll see as we look forward here that the argument falls apart in just a moment. All right, so who's in favor of home rule? So obviously Redmond and the IPP are in favor of home rule, but also we're going to get these two groups. So let's start over here first with Connolly. So James Connolly, he's the leader of the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World. He's the leader of the Irish branch of the IWW. This is like a global workers union, right? And he's also the leader of the Irish Socialist Republican Party. So Connolly is going to stay with us for a little while. He's going to be part of the rebellion coming up here. And he is in favor of home rule, but he's also in favor of like socialism. He's also in favor of a lot of the same kinds of progressive era reforms that we got in the United States, that we got in other countries at this time period, right? So we're talking about workers' rights, we're talking about like workplace safety, we're talking about the end of child labor, we're talking about women's rights, we're talking about a lot of those kinds of exactly the same kinds of populist reforms and progressive reforms. And this group is going to flirt with communism. We're a little bit too early for communism at this point, but they are definitely flirting with communism. In fact, he's going to lead, Connolly is going to lead us on the Dublin lockout of 1913. This is going to be the largest labor strike in Irish history, where basically the entire city of Dublin is going to get locked down, and a lot of other cities around the country, Belfast and Cork and some of these other cities are going to get locked down with labor disputes, where they're going to have massive demonstrations. And just like we've seen in South Africa, India, and the United States, and everywhere else, these big labor disputes are going to get ended with the police beating people down, essentially. So this is going to turn into a big, giant brawl where the police are going to kill people and going to hurt people, which is, of course, going to galvanize Irishmen against the evil British. The other group that I want you to put in here, so this was one of the big numbers, Connolly and his group. So one of the big numbers. The next big number is Irish Women's Franchise League. So the Irish Women's Franchise League is the suffragette movement, the women's suffrage movement of Ireland itself. Okay, so we have the women of England who are opposing home rule, and we have the women of Ireland who are supporting it. Their leader is this woman here, Hannah Sheehy Skeffington. She's a pretty interesting lady. We'll get back to her in a sec. But this group is making an argument that women are not getting any rights under England. They're not getting any rights in the UK, and that by having home rule, that these women's groups will have more say and more power within Ireland itself, and that the leadership will be closer to the people of Ireland, and that they will be able to get their vote. Now, as soon as Ireland gets independence, the women are going to have suffrage, a right upon independence. So there's at least some truth in Skeffington's argument here, right? In Sheehy Skeffington's argument. So, so just like we saw some truth with the women's groups in England, we also see some truth with this group here as well. She's pretty interesting. So Hannah Sheehy Skeffington and Margaret Cousins, along with Sissy Callahan, these guys are going to be leaders of the movement here. And Skeffington and Cousins in particular are two big leaders. They both come from wealthy families. They both come from like wealthy landowning families. And so they are like the leaders of the group. Sissy Callahan is like our highest ranked member of the group, who is from the working class background. She's actually a teacher. So she's actually part of the revolution where she's working all day long, and she's the mother of three, and then she also has to go, be a revolutionary in the evenings and on the weekends and stuff. So she's kind of a cool figure for the movement. But Skeffington and Cousins are going to be part of this women's rights group that is going to be kind of more aggressive and more loud. They are going to get arrested multiple times, many times for, assaulting people, for protesting in like loud, obnoxious, violent, intrusive ways. They're actually going to go to London, and they're going to get arrested for throwing rocks through the House of Lords, the windows of the House of Lords, and shattering those windows. And then they say, as long as women are not free, then you can't sit comfortably, right? And so they get arrested. The British put them in jail, and put them in jail as just regular old criminals. But under British law, political prisoners are supposed to have more rights and more privileges, and so they go on hunger strike to protest their placement in a regular prison, and it works. Their hunger strike works. The British cave, and the British move them into a regular prison where they will then set trial, and then the judge basically just lets them walk. And so that's good. The last one we're going to do here, the last one is as we're moving forward into the 19 teens, we're going to start getting these armed militias that are going to start rising up. So the Orange Order is going to become the Ulster Volunteers. So the Orange Order was kind of a more political group, and they become the Ulster Volunteers. And so this is an armed group. This is like an armed militia dedicated to staying part of Great Britain. Not Great Britain, staying part of the UK, staying in a union with the UK. On the other side, we're going to get the Irish Volunteers. These are going to be groups of these three groups that are going to kind of work together to become an armed militia again. The Gaelic League we've already met. The Hibernians are like one of those secret societies I told you about in the beginning. And the Hibernians are basically like a hunting society, which is why they're allowed to carry guns everywhere. Um, and then this one here, Sinn Féin. So Sinn Féin is a political party which is not very popular yet, but will become very popular shortly. Sinn Féin is still the number one political party in Ireland today. It's the ruling party of Ireland and has been the ruling party of Ireland for most of Ireland's history. And so it's this like up and coming party that's going to rise up. The IPP is going to fall, and then Sinn Féin is going to rise up and fill that gap. Um, okay, I'm going to leave it here. We're going to do World War II next. We'll do World War II next, or I'm sorry, World War One, and World War One is, as you can probably predict, going to be very controversial for the Irish, and it's going to lead into armed rebellion, and eventually, next class period, the Irish are going to get their independence. So there you go. All right. Sorry I couldn't do this live with you guys, but schedules are schedules. So, all right. Have a good day.